All right, everybody, you are back. This is Jack Murphy Live. I am Jack Murphy, and I am here with Dave Rubin, the host of the Rubin Report, author of the book Don't Burn This Book, and the creator of Locals. How are you doing, Dave?
Jack, I'm good, man. I'm just back from 10 days in Florida. I got a little color in the face and I saw freedom. I experienced human beings eating and drinking together. I'm feeling good. I'm back in LA now, which isn't as good, but my house is nice, so that's all right.
Did you eat one peanut at a time all 5 hours back on the flight to keep the mask off?
Dude, that was not a joke. So what you're referring to is this tweet that I sent out on the plane. They twice announced before we took off that we had to eat in a somewhat speedy fashion, I think was the phrase he used. And then the guy said that means you cannot eat peanuts one at a time. Now, first off, I thought you weren't even allowed to bring peanuts on a plane. So who knows what happened with that. But just like this level of just like endless stupidity. And it's not really stupidity because it's actually something much more dangerous. It's the endless sort of, we are going to treat you all like children and you better obey our rules at every turn. And then every authoritarian flight attendant or, maitre d' at a restaurant or whatever it might be, just comes up with their new rules. So I did not have peanuts, but I did drink my drink slowly and I chewed my ice and did everything I could so that I could breathe actual air. And you're not going to believe this, Jack. I'm alive. I made it.
You're alive. Is everybody else on the plane alive too? You didn't get anybody sick?
From what I understand, everyone got on the plane fine and everyone got off the plane fine. I'm sure the government's now tracking people and we need to put chips in human beings so that the government can track them and we can find out, who people had dinner with. This is an important part of freedom. And no, I think everybody's fine. Happening. But for real, man, I mean, going from where I live in LA, California, obviously, to the free state of Florida and seeing the difference, it truly felt like going to another country. And in many ways, that's the way this country was set up, that the states were supposed to be different. The states were supposed to be governed in different ways and have different laws and all of that. So in many ways, the federalist system is really flourishing right now. It's just kind of depressing when you're in one of the blue states, at least for now.
I think that was a huge criticism of Trump in the early days of Corona when he basically took a very federalist approach. He says locally enacted, state authorized, and federally supported. And I thought that was a great approach. And he caught a lot of crap for that, of course, which is interesting because what did they want him to do? Be more authoritarian, lay down more national mandates, tell people what to do. He basically, the funny part, I just realized this the other day, the funniest part about the Democrats and Trump right now is that the only part about Trump that they liked was anything having to do with lockdowns, anything having to do with being authoritarian. They praise that part of him, and they want more authoritarian fascism out of their new guy, Biden.
Well, look, the key symptom of Trump derangement syndrome is that he could get people to take virtually any position as long as it was in opposition to whatever he said. So you're totally right. What would you want the president to do in virtually every circumstance? You would say, hey, you guys at the state level, figure out what's right for you. You have different populations. You have different weather. People are of different ages. Population density. What happens in Montana? Very different than what happens in metropolitan New York City, right? Like, we all know all this stuff is true. And then, of course, the very people who were saying Trump is Hitler, the authoritarian Hitler, they were saying, well, no, he wasn't doing enough federally and he was giving too much power to the governors. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. But yeah, your general premise also is right, which is that these guys love power. That's what the dynamic in America, people think it's left, right, it's conservative, liberal. It's basically power, authoritarian power, or do you believe in the free individual? And by the way, believing in the free individual, which I know guys like us obviously do, it's a little messy and it's not perfect, but it's a hell of a lot better than pretending that all the experts and all the politicians who don't give a crap about us and who get everything wrong along the way have somehow have attained some ordained power and ordained knowledge to tell us how to live our lives. It's crazy, actually.
It's kind of funny if you think about it. The Democrats, I think, were just jealous. They were jealous of Trump's seeming ability to be authoritarian or whatever they were projecting onto him. And they're like, I like it. I want it. I want more of that. I want more of that, even though he was a terrible totalitarian.
Dude, they are all of the things that they purported him to be. That is really where we're at. They would love to use the power of the state to silence people. They would love to use the power of the state to jail their political opponents. These aren't just, I'm not just talking about ideas here. I mean, they're telling us they want to do this. AOC, during the congressional hearings on big tech, was basically saying to Zuckerberg and to Jack over at Twitter, hey, if you guys don't censor people, we will. But she knows she can't because of the First Amendment. So you outsource tyranny. That's a phrase that I think Tim Pool came up with. I mean, this is what they want to do. And, I made I'm full of Star Wars references for better or worse, but I had sent out a little Star Wars thread before the election that in effect, once Biden won, that what would you do if big tech and big government had the power? Well, you would shut down the droid army, to do a little prequel reference, right? You would just say, hey, we won the war, so we don't even need one side of it. And I think in effect, that's what we're seeing right now. When you watch conservative voices be banned, when you watch Parler get taken out, when you watch all of the things that we know are happening. I mean, look what's going on in Australia, where they're just taking out Facebook pages left and right. When you watch these digital assassinations, the president of the freaking United States, they coordinated to boot him, not just off Twitter and YouTube, but off Spotify and Pinterest. It's like, who's more powerful, the guy with the power or the guy who allows the guy with the power to say the stuff? Who, you tell me.
They canceled his Pinterest page.
They got rid of Pinterest, man. What the hell's going on? He can't bake a cake, or I don't know what they're doing on Pinterest.
I had no idea. I'm missing out on that.
Knitting.
Every once in a while, I get a Pinterest link, and I'm like, I don't know. This is some foreign territory. Like it's another country. I have no idea what that's all about there. But there's a lot of things we could talk about. I want to sort of talk about comedy. I want to talk about interviewing, the art of the conversation. I want to talk about your experience with entrepreneurship. And eventually I want to talk about the IDW, the state of the future of a little bit of a drill down on that. So it's a little bit of a tease for later on. But you brought something up, Dave. You and I are very similar in so many ways, actually. We were born in the same year. We, I think, both graduated high school in 1994.
That is right.
Yep. I did a little research. We've had the process of going from my phrase Democrat to deplorable, or, really just standing still as somebody who believes in the basic concept of leave me alone and everything will be just fine. And you mentioned Star Wars again just now, being the same age. I grew up with Star Wars. I remember going to see Empire Strikes Back in the theater and all these things. And I was watching Mandalorian. And the first season of Mandalorian I didn't love so much, but the second season really started to pick up. And without ruining it, by the end of Mandalorian, it was like the most fun I had had watching Star Wars in years. And no spoilers here, but it really tied like decades worth of my life together. And is that sad to say? I don't know, but it definitely did. But now, Dave, what are you going to do? I am faced with a quandary. Right. I was a fan of Gina Carano back before she was ever in the UFC, because I'm a Muay Thai fighter, an amateur fighter. And I remember her coming up as a Muay Thai fighter, and it was fun to watch her. And then they started priming her to go into the UFC. So I've tracked her career all through this. And now that they've banned her for saying something that wasn't even offensive in the slightest, what are you going to do with Star Wars, Dave?
Yeah, well, first, let's hit the last part there. What she said was not offensive. And if you are offended by what she said, you really have to think about what your philosophy is related to life. In essence, what she was saying is the way we are demonizing the other, in this case, conservative or pretty much anyone non-woke, is similar to the way that the Germans demonized the Jews before the Holocaust. She didn't, considering all of these people run around calling all of us Nazis all day long and calling everyone else Hitler, you would think that they would have a little leeway when it comes to making Nazi references, right? They're the ones, of course, doing things that are far more in line, or at least using the line of thought that is far more in line with Nazi-style thinking, centralized power and collectivist thinking. So just to be very, very clear, she did absolutely nothing wrong. I 100% stand with her. I look forward to chatting with her, and I like her work and all that good stuff. As far as Star Wars, you bring up an interesting point, and I'm glad we're starting there, because this isn't really about Star Wars, but at some level, you're right. What Mandalorian did finally by the end, because I didn't love the first season either, was they started tying things together. Oh, and these are decades of our life. So you were born in 76, I assume, just like me. We graduated the same year. And for those of us that are Gen X right now, it's like we're hitting what should be the prime of our lives right now, right? We're not in our 20s anymore when you're still figuring it out. 30s, you could be figuring out. We're in our 40s, let's say early 50s or late 30s, like that nice 20-year run that you have in life when you're physically still able to do stuff, you're mentally sharp, you want to work, you want to build, all of those things. What's interesting in the world right now is that the world is being run by, look, even Trump, who obviously I came to like, 74 years old, Joe Biden, 78, Chuck Schumer, late 70s, Nancy Pelosi is like, what, 80, 104, and Feinstein's 1,000. I mean, the world has just sort of allowed people that are too old to hang on. And the reason this is relevant to Star Wars and all of this is that we need new stories. We really, really need new stories. When I watched that last Avengers movie, Endgame, by the end, although I really enjoyed the movie, and I thought Infinity War was particularly good, but by the end, it felt gross. It was just like, oh, we've been at an all-day orgy with the Avengers, and every story has just basically came all over itself. That's sort of where we're at, that we actually need new stories. And what I liked about Mandalorian by the end is they were able to sort of wrap something up, but we either need new characters, this would be a very Jordan Peterson take on things, like, biblical stories provide sort of eternal lessons, but, we don't just need biblical stories. We also need art. We need science fiction. We need these things, and we need new things. I would say the one caveat to that is, did you watch Cobra Kai by any chance?
Funny you should ask. I'm a big fan of Karate Kid, watched the movies over and over again. I remember rewinding my VCR back to the point at which the tournament started 50,000 times. I just watched it again with my kids just the other night, 8, 14, 15. They're like, wow, this is incredible. I even choked up at the end again, just because it connected me to my childhood in a very powerfully nostalgic way. I gave Cobra Kai a shot. Maybe I wasn't warned enough in advance of like how campy it was supposed to be, because I was watching it thinking, what is this nonsense?
Oh, I'm shocked, man. Wait, how many episodes in did you get?
Just one. I made it through one episode.
Listen, trust me, just give it 2 or 3 episodes, because what they do in Cobra Kai, and yes, it's campy and it's silly and it's self-referential and all of these things, but they do such a great twist on what good and evil is, and how they go into the backstory in a way that lets you realize that bad guys were once good guys and good guys were once bad guys. They do a lot of the stuff that turned the last 3 Star Wars movies into such trash, because there was no sensible continuum throughout. But all of this I say because what am I going to do with Star Wars? Well, I tweeted that I was going to cancel my Disney account. I had to clean it up because my sister also had my account. Could I be in trouble now? And she's got 2 young kids, and I didn't want to boot the kids off Moana or whatever they're watching on there. But yes, I literally just texted her yesterday saying it's being canceled. And that's the only thing we can do. Why would you pay? Why would you pay the people who are trying to destroy the world that you want to live in? And I know that sounds sort of over the top or something, but that is the truth. If every time you turn on PlayStation and they offer you a Black Lives Matter free background, if that's not in line with what you believe, if every time you open up Uber Eats, go to Black-owned businesses, you're not going to believe this, Jack. I don't care whether the guy who makes my chicken sandwich or my smoothie is black or white. I don't care. But it's the anti-racists who are now the racists, and that concept has now been infiltrated completely into our institutions. And by the way, Disney, which owns pretty much everything, is a massive institution. So I know that my $5.99 a month or whatever it is isn't anything in the scheme of things, but me saying this probably has a little value, and maybe some other people will cancel as well. And I just hope we will find better stories. And by the way, there are better stories out there, even related to the properties that exist, because you can go on YouTube and find fan things from Star Wars that are way better than any of the crap that Kathleen Kennedy and the Disney monolith is coming out with.
Jon Favreau involved in both of those productions, Mandalorian and the Avengers as well. And by the end of the Avengers, I respected it for the body of work. Man,
yeah,
that was impressive, right? But I'm over it. But interesting to note, the superhero archetype it played well. It played well in a day in which, the traditional masculine hero, the He-Man. I mentioned He-Man to my girlfriend earlier this morning. She's a little bit younger than me, and she's like, "What's He-Man?
What's a He-Man?
What's a
Come on,
He-Man?"
man. Skeletor, Merman, Beastman,
Exactly.
Man at Arms, Tila, Castle Grayskull.
All of these, I told you, dude, we grew up at the exact same time, watched all the same shows, I'm sure. But He-Man, it's funny that she didn't even know what that was. But the Avenger archetype, the hero archetype, it seemed to play well, which doesn't necessarily jive with a lot of this cultural stuff that we're talking about, right? Like demasculinization and the flattening of everybody and blurring of boundaries and everybody's a superhero and all that. It did strike me as actually a little anachronistic for our time, but still welcomed. I wonder if they're gonna, if that genre is dead, is there gonna be a new hero, a new type of art? Like, what is your vision for art that reflects our values? I mean, that's a great question. Who's attacking that?
It is a great question. You asked the question and also said that it was a great question. That's a fine move by an interviewer. That was pretty good right there. I know a little something about interviewing. I think that was pretty good. No, it really is a great question though, because you're right. And what it feels like is happening right now with the entire world, with lockdowns, with our political craziness, everything, is that it does feel like we're at the end of a certain stage, that the internet over the last 20 years accelerated the end of a certain way of looking at the world. Now, what's happening is with the woke crew is they just want to burn the whole thing down. They think that everyone that came before them is a bigot or evil or racist or homophobic or something. And they refuse to acknowledge that anything good has happened. And I would say in the case of America, something extraordinarily good has happened that has offered more freedoms to everyone from across the world than any other place could have ever been imagined before America existed. We need these new stories. And the problem is that you just referenced this. I have no problem with Jon Favreau. I think he's a good guy and he's done some nice work. But the fact that he does Marvel, Iron Man, Avengers, and Star Wars, and both of those things are owned by a giant corporation called Disney. Our dreams are now owned by corporations that would be the bad guys in the Disney movies, right? You saw the Disney movie Robots. Remember that one from 20 years ago? The bad guy in effect was Disney. Or if you think of WALL-E, that we all become these fat, pathetic blobs that live just to watch things on screens and play. I mean, it's literally happening right now. They're trying to lock us in our house, say, stay online all day, go to Zoom school. And by the way, if you say certain things, we're not even going to give you access to the screens or to the ability to communicate and everything else. So in many ways, the corporations have now become the very thing that they used to mock. So we need new stories. The question is, it's like, well, think about it this way. When was the last time you heard a new musician that you really love, like some new music that you really love? I don't know when the last time was for me. I mean, if you look at my Spotify playlist, I listen to a lot of Frank Sinatra. I listen to a lot of Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons. I do a lot of ambient electronica. I like that kind of stuff. But like, when's the last, a great painter, a great pianist, whatever it might be, it's like, it's been a while. We have to figure these things out. And as far as the movie part of it, it's like, yeah, if everything has to go through those giant studios, how can they ever give us anything real? How can the people who push wokeism on us, who push collectivism on us, how can they ever give us art that celebrates the individual, which I think is what true art really does? And I don't think they can do it. And that's why we're at this very intractable place right now.
Interesting. So many things just came to mind. Art, in my lifetime, I think of art as dissident, as counterculture, as critiquing the establishment. But interestingly enough, art throughout most of history was there to reinforce the establishment, right? You have pictures of saints and Jesus and Mary and all of your murals and statues to your leaders and all these things. So art was controlled by the establishment. You needed patrons to fund it. It reflected establishment values. It wasn't necessarily dissident. It wasn't, in fact, at all dissident. In fact, it was part of the empire. Right. Beautiful, amazing stuff, but still part of pushing the establishment and strengthening their control. But in my lifetime, art was dissident. It was punk rock. It was how you criticize the government, how you expressed yourself in a way that couldn't be expressed otherwise. But it feels like now art has been re-co-opted by the corporations, which is truly like the end of a life cycle for any subcultures when it gets co-opted by the corporations. And now the corporations are all in unison and controlling our dreams and controlling our childhoods. And let's not forget, it's not just that it all goes through one corporation now. In the case of Hollywood, it also goes across the Pacific through the CCP and then back here to the United States with the stamp of approval of literal communists, like literally communists, stamping our art for consumption in America.
Listen, not that I'm going to tell you that the Transformers movies by Michael Bay were art, because I'm not completely psychotic. Those were horrible movies, which also sort of wrecked something of our childhood, right?
Indeed,
the original Amazing Transformers, which if anyone is a Transformers fan, you should go back and watch the original cartoon Transformers movie of 1985, which is edgy and real, and the soundtrack is amazing and all that stuff. But remember, there were I think 5 of the Transformer movies plus Bumblebee. I mean, each one got progressively worse, but the one which I think was number 4, where they take them to China and they had all these Chinese actors and all this stuff. I don't have a problem with Chinese actors. Obviously, I don't have problem with things being shot in China, but it was so obvious that they were saying, hey, we are making a shift where China will be more important than the American audience. And what do you get then with that? If the idea is, okay, this sort of has to make China happy and it has to make the woke elite happy, are you going to get something interesting, or are you just going to get a bunch of robots that nobody can see the difference between them bashing each other over the head? I mean, it's all why all of this sucks. And again, I would bring it back to music, because it's like, where is someone singing something that has some value? You know, I watched this 2-part documentary on Netflix about Frank Sinatra. And if you haven't seen it, it's really, really wonderful. You don't even have to love Sinatra to appreciate it. But I think you'll love this particular part. There's a moment where, Sinatra was a lefty his entire life, and he was fighting against racism. And they talk about how, he would have black band members with him, and certain hotels wouldn't want them to, stay in the same floor or whatever. And he would fight against that. And he was really a great guy and a progressive in the true sense, because he was really a liberal. And then what happened was he met Ronald Reagan, who of course was the actor and then Republican governor of California. And once he went public with his friendship with Ronald Reagan, Sinatra went from being a media darling to hated by the media and being called a racist, and they were always going after him and his family and everything else. Does that sound a little familiar to you as to how the media treats people who have a little bit of an evolution? And I mention that because, he wrote what my favorite Sinatra song is, My Way. The idea that, regrets, you shouldn't have regrets. They got you there. I did it my way. I did it my way. And so few people are willing to do it their way. They just want to see what the system chokes out and follow it. And what that gets you is kind of what we got right now.
Yes, the lack of intentionality by everyone right now is one of the biggest problems that we've got. If you just take the conventional wisdom, if you just listen to what they tell you, if you just float on the sea, you end up fat, nutritional pyramid, anybody? Sick, in debt, and chained to a desk for the rest of your life. That's the conventional wisdom. And if you push back against that, there's going to be a little bit of blowback. And to just wrap up this segment here real quick, boycotting corporations feels good. It's not going to be hugely effective, I don't think, in our small numbers. But something I have seen on the internet lately that does give me a little hope is this hashtag Bet on Main Street. I don't know if you've seen that, but it's about getting people to go down to screw the banks, screw Corona, screw the lockdown, screw the corporations, take out some cash, go down to Main Street, plunk down cash, over tip, support a local business. That's something, that one transaction could lift somebody's day, lift somebody's spirit. If you over tip and maybe a few more people come, maybe they are getting that break that they've needed, that they didn't get the support through the lockdowns, all that. So Bet on Main Street is something that I would like to see take off, and people get out there and spend some money on your local businesses. That's
I'm with
how we're
you,
going to
man.
stand
Real
together.
quick, let me just say one thing on the tipping side of that, because I think you're totally right. In every place that I went in Florida, I got a $7, 2 scoops of ice cream, and I gave the guy $20 tip, because there is a way to reset this, but the way to reset it isn't that Bernie Sanders comes in and tells a small ice cream shop owner that he has to pay that high school kid $15 an hour. So now the ice cream shop owner who I met, who's turned his life around, I know he's a fan, he's probably watching this right now, turned his life around, was a drug addict, okay, who turned his life around because he read Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, all right? And then you're gonna come in, the government, he opens up an ice cream shop. He has all these high school kids working for him and say to him, no, you got to pay them all $15 an hour. Like, congratulations, you don't have an ice cream shop anymore. So it's not going to be fixed by the government up there. It's going to be fixed by the people down here. So in my mind, it was like, yeah, I had a $7 ice cream. And it was like, these kids were great. It was like they were working hard. I know how this guy has busted his ass to turn his life around, and I'm doing okay. So I was more than happy to do it. More than happy to do it. And that's how we will fix these things, by being human at this level, not at that level.
Yes. What strikes me about what you just said is that the Democrats seem to at once have complete faith in the compassion and capabilities of the government, but zero faith in compassion shown by humans and fellow citizens. What is that? Why do they expect no one to step up and be charitable, no one to step up and be of service, no one to step up and over tip? Like, what
it's
is
a very well, it's a great question, because it really, you're, in some ways you're saying like what is the nature of truth? Like, what is the meaning of life? Like, how do you fundamentally view the world? And I would say that these leftists, these wokeists, whatever you want to call them, it's a fundamentally very dim and depressing way of looking at humanity. And by the way, I think that there's a direct connection with that, and then often why that if you look at them, they're often very fat and they often don't take care of themselves and all of those things. And I'm not trying to make this about looks or something like that, but there is a direct connection between personal responsibility, saying, hey, I am a person of the world and I can do the best I can. And by the way, you're going to make mistakes along the way, which of course, Jack, we all do, right? Myself included, of course. But it's a very dim way to say, oh, only if the system, this magical esoteric system somewhere in the distance, only if that had enough power, then things could be right. I fundamentally do not believe that. I do not believe that. I believe the best that a system can do is say, hey, we're going to treat you all equally. And guess what? We know that some of you were brought up with more. Some of you had some money because your parents did this or that. Some of you were born crack addicted. Some of you were born with, I mean, the litany of things that make up life. But which is the inspirational and aspirational way of looking at the world? That you have a chance through hard work and dedication and all of those things to make a difference, or that if we only gave this system enough power, that it would do good things. And then, of course, the irony is they're always complaining about the system. So their solution is always give the system more power, take from some, give to others. And also the whole system is patriarchal and evil and everything else. So you know what? I'll kind of go with you on that. But my solution is different, which is starve the system.
Yeah, there was a Ron Paul clip
I saw it. It's going around.
Okay, I was going around yesterday.
Yeah.
And the audience is like, more government control, more power, more and he says, well, if the government, effectively he's saying, if the government had more power, they might tell you, hey, fatty, you're too fat. Why don't you lose some weight? And they were just like aghast at the notion that anyone would be critical of them, much less force you to do something. And that's where the logic breaks down. Obviously, it's not about truly wanting the best things for everybody. It is truly all about power, grabbing power, protecting yours, taking it away from other people, all in the name of justice. We know the drill at this point, but that clip, that clip going around from yesterday cracked me up, man. You saw that?
It's a hilarious clip because it's from the Morton Downey Jr. show, which
right?
is also, I remember watching that when I was like 12 and thinking, man, this is nuts. Here's this guy, Morton Downey Jr. There was something kind of funny about the way he looked, and he was always chain smoking and screaming at people. And he would do these really bizarre political shows. I mean, it was when Ron Paul, this is probably 1985 or something, was running as the Libertarian presidential candidate, and people are screaming, and it feels like Maury or something, but has a political context to it, not just, oh, who's the baby daddy? And it's like, people will yell at us now that, oh, politics is so messed up and everyone's so mean about. And I was watching that thinking, well, I guess it was like that back then, and maybe we need more of it, because didn't that feel, that Morton Downey Jr. clip, which I'll tweet out when we get done with this so people can see it, but it felt like, oh, this is more real than any of the pre-packaged BS that we're getting on CNN or MSNBC or ABC or anywhere else. So maybe we need to go back to that, like a WWE style politics. Maybe that's healthier than this nonsense.
It is. Maybe we should start doing more Crossfire type things, blood sport, YouTube blood sport shows. Let's do it. Let's do it. All right, we've got a number of things I want to talk about here, and we're going to get to IDW because to me that there's a lot of questions. But I want to just back up a little bit, and we started talking about the '80s. We started talking about Maury Povich, the Maury Show, and just made me think, about your background and the way you came up. And I didn't know this about you, actually, about you getting started doing stand-up. I thought stand-up was something that now you had like made it, that you were going to just like take a stroll down some new adventure here. But comedy was the first thing that you got into. So tell me about that, because I have always believed that, well, I've never done it. I know it's hard. I know there's a ton of work that goes into even 1 minute of stage time. I feel like it might be a place for me. I've always been very intrigued by it. What about it drew you into comedy, and what were some of your early experiences like, Dave?
Yeah, it's funny. I'm glad you're asking because, now I do politics and, sometimes I'm kind of funny on my show, but sometimes I'm talking about a lot of serious stuff and that's just not part of the equation. But, when I toured with Jordan and we did 120 stops in about 20 countries in a little over a year, basically, I would do like 15 minutes of stand-up, crowd work up top, just getting the crowd to have fun, because Jordan was going to bring the fire and brimstone stuff for an hour and a half. And then we would like some serious stuff about, sit up straight and let's get this life in order, right? So I would just make sure that, in front of usually about 4,000 people, like let's get everybody laughing to start. And then we would do a Q&A at the end for about a half hour, the two of us, and I would poke fun at him or mention some of the things that he said. The reason I got into stand-up is that my friends were all funny. I suspect it was probably similar for you. I always said to all my, like, somebody was going to be a comedian. It was just obvious. Like we just loved comedy. I remember seeing Naked Gun in the movie theater in 1989. I was 13 years old, and a fat man in front of me in the movie theater, I was sitting in the aisle seat, fell out of his chair laughing. I remember feeling that pain in my stomach from laughing so hard. I still believe Naked Gun is the best comedy movie of all time. Yes, better than Airplane. I will go on the record as saying that. But I always just loved comedy. And, Oscar Wilde, basically, if you want to tell people the truth, you better be funny or they're going to kill you. So when I got out of college, well, actually, the last thing that I did in college, I had already finished all my papers, my last tests, the whole thing. Literally, the last thing I did, I was in a public speaking class, and we were told to just give a talk on anything. And I gave like a 8-minute talk about what it was like to be in college. And I talked about sex and I talked about drugs and all sorts of stuff. And I did it while sitting in a chair because my comedy hero from childhood was Bill Cosby. And yes, he turned out to be one of the all-time biggest rapists, but nobody's perfect. But I saw 1983, I was 7 years old. I saw Bill Cosby himself, and that's the famous dentist routine and the chocolate cake and the whole thing. And I just thought, how could you not want to make people laugh? Like, what could possibly be better than this? Flash forward for about 12, 13 years in New York City. I did stand-up usually 6 nights a week, usually 2 gigs. I started a bunch of comedy clubs. I was always a hustler. So I saw that the clubs, were really taking advantage of the comics. So me and a couple other comics, we started some underground comedy clubs. And I was one of those guys in Times Square, 2 hours a night in rain nor sleet nor snow. We'd be out there handing out tickets so we could get a little bit of stage time. And, I worked the road for a while and I lived that life. And the funny thing about comedy is that for all of those years of the struggle, and this is before YouTube and all of that stuff, I was just one of 10 guys you'd see. And, I always fiddled around with the crowd. I didn't like to do a lot of like straight up, you're like, what's the deal with this kind of jokes? But now that I've attained some other public level of success, every show that I've done over the last like 4 years, I've sold out every club, and I just get up there and I talk to the crowd and we have a great time, and I throw t-shirts into the crowd and I get people chatting, and it's more like I'm running a circus than a stand-up show. I don't have the need anymore in a way. One of the things I heard George Carlin give a great little talk on the need about a comic. You got to have a lot of pain and a lot of crazy stuff. We all know this with comics, and that can fuel you for a while. but and here's the trick. The trick is if you want to become great at whatever you do, you have to conquer that pain. What happens to a lot of comedians is they need that pain to keep being funny. And I think this happens to we see this with musicians and all kinds of artists. You can't give up that initial pain, so thus you get destroyed by it. And for me, as my life got better, as I dealt with some of the stuff that I had to deal with, came to terms with myself, whatever it is, I didn't need it as much. So when I go do it now, it's like, I have a freaking ball. Like, I just have fun with it. And that's been really nice. But I do wish that more people saw some of that part of me. And hopefully when the country opens up, I'll start doing it again.
What was it that you needed to process?
Oh, well, look, I was closeted for a long time, which, that had a lot to do with it. I was closeted in many ways into my late 20s and at some level almost into my 30s. And, when you're closeted, and by the way, you can be closeted, people think of the closet as just purely about sexuality. But I think if you have some internal issue, whatever that might be, you dealt with an abusive parent, you're closeted about your sexuality, you were hooked on drugs, whatever your thing is, and we've all got something, right? If you don't deal with it head on, and it takes a long time, man, and I still have the scars of some of that stuff. I would say if I have any remaining sort of existential issue in my life, it's that I remember the self-inflicted damage that I did to myself because of that. So I think, look, if you can't get approval from yourself, what's a great way to get approval? Well, a bunch of strangers will laugh at you. You'll say something and a bunch of strangers will laugh at you. And that warmth and that love, man, you can ride that for a long time. But as I just said with the Carlin thing, it's like at some point, if you don't conquer that, if you just want to be, the comic, the neurotic comic, the fat comic, the loser, whatever it is, it's like, man, well, you don't really want to be that. Like, it's good as shtick, but you don't really want to be that. So you got to conquer your stuff. And I don't know that anyone ever fully conquers it, right? Like, that's probably the ultimate challenge in life, that monster that's chasing you, maybe it just doesn't chase you 90% of the time, but it's always there. It's always there, I think.
It must have been interesting doing stand-up for catharsis, but still not able to talk about the thing that you needed the catharsis from. You see the comedians get up there, they talk about their drug addiction, they talk about their alcoholism, they talk about their failed marriages or their dad or, how they're screw-ups at life and whatnot, and they work some of that stuff out, and you can really see it. Was it hard not actually being able to use it for catharsis in the same way that the comedians do, other comedians?
Well, it was interesting because I was always doing a lot of political stuff and a lot of cultural stuff. I mean, I was making fun of Wolf Blitzer and CNN literally in like 1999. Like, I was doing a lot of that sort of stuff. So my style was like a little more, let's say, a guy like Bill Maher. You don't really know anything about Bill Maher's personal life. I mean, I guess he likes to smoke weed and bang hookers occasionally or something like that.
Those are the first two things that came to mind for me.
Right. But you don't know anything about Bill Maher. That's his style. Then you could take a guy like, or really the best example of this, I would say, is George Carlin and Richard Pryor, because, they're usually the number 1 and 2 in terms of all-time great stand-ups. Well, George Carlin, you knew very, very little about George Carlin. You knew what his worldview was, but not a lot about him. Richard Pryor, he turned it on himself. You knew a lot about the inner workings of Richard Pryor. So it's sort of just stylistically which way you can go with it. So I was doing a lot of stuff that was more cultural than personal. But I can tell you this, I'm not going to say that I didn't get up there and I would, if I made a joke, like the reference was, oh, it was my girlfriend or something, when it just wasn't. And at some point, as my life got better, as I started dealing with that stuff, as I started telling people the truth in my private life, once those two tracks, like, it was sort of like this, my comedy career was going really well, but my life was falling behind. And once I started fixing my life, well, actually the stuff that I was doing on stage started to feel thin because it wasn't as honest. And it wasn't until I lined those two things up that my life really started coming together. So I would say right now I'm playing with a pretty full deck, because I have lined those things up nicely. And again, it ain't perfect.
What you're talking about is something I talk about quite a bit, which is alignment. Alignment between your values, your personal values, your mission in life, your day-to-day actions. When those things are all lined up, you can live in an authentic manner. and you don't need any motivation. You don't need like, how am I going to find, where's the energy to do all this stuff? No, the only thing that you need then is like, how do I make my life more efficient so that I can accomplish all these things that I'm propelled towards? Are you feeling propelled these days, Dave?
Oh, yeah. Well, first off, I love what you just said there. I mean, not only propelled, like I wake up every day this morning. So I'm just back from Florida for these 10 days. So I'm still slightly on East Coast time. So I woke up this morning at about 6. Now I'm usually a pretty early riser anyway. 6:30, 7 o'clock would be the latest. And I find I'm my best in terms of writing and working for I can basically, like when I was writing my book, I would get up at say 7 a.m. I could write to 2 p.m. sometimes without even eating. I'd have coffee. And then it was like when I was done with it, when I closed my computer or closed my notepad, I was like, I'm done for the day. Not that I'm not going to continue doing some level of work, but like if I wake up, I'm ready to roll. But I think because of the alignment that you're talking about, I wake up with purpose every day. Like I could show you my calendar today. I'm interviewing Jordan Peterson later today, which we're holding till his book comes out next week. I'm talking to Clay Travis a little bit later. I'm doing some more stuff for my new book. And it's the stuff that I want to do. Like I'm super busy. I work really hard, but I really love it. And then guess what? When it's done at the end of the day, I mean, you see me on Twitter. I love barbecuing and throwing steaks on the grill. And David, my husband's an incredible chef. And I love great wine. And I'm getting into cocktail making and stuff like that. And I love walking my dog. And my day is freaking full. And like last night, it was about 10 o'clock. And usually I'll just flip on Netflix or I'll turn on YouTube for a little bit and watch like some old basketball games or something like that. But I actually passed out by 10 o'clock just on the couch. I woke up probably 3 a.m., strolled upstairs, went to bed and started again. And it was a pretty great day. And I think when you're really doing what you're supposed to do, time actually changes. You will realize that suddenly you'll be like, holy shit, that was a month that just went by. Like I was in the flow, man. And then you'll get tripped up again. Your old bad habits come back, whatever that stuff is. You're not dealing in your relationships right or whatever. And then time changes and things get worse. And it's on you to know when to fix those things. And
what signals do you look for as an indicator that you need to either like reset or get back to your mindfulness, or how do you know when you're getting off kilter?
I would say the main one is when I find myself frustrated at people for no particularly good reason. Even like David and I have a great relationship. We've been together for 10 years. We're really good and happy and all that stuff. But like if he just mentioned something, like he'll just mention something that's going on during the day. And if my initial reaction is, I don't have time for that, or I'm just not in the mood to talk about that right now, something is kind of out of whack. Because even if I don't particularly care about that specific thing, right? Like if you're married to somebody, if you love somebody, if you care about somebody, if you're saying this person's my partner, well, you got to make the space to not be frustrated by those things. And that is kind of work. So I would say little frustrations. By the way, one of the things that I am struggling with right now is as I'm in this lockdown LA, like when I see people with masks everywhere, and I see people when I'm literally walking my dog one way down the street and someone's walking their dog this way, and I always let Clyde, if he wants to sniff, he can sniff away. And I see people rip their dog away and they make sure their mask is on and they're kind of afraid. Like I'm frustrated at that person. I'm kind of angry at that person. And that's why I was so happy in Florida, because I was like, hey, people are just trying to live here. And I think that spirit is something that I really care about. And my hope is that we recall this clown Gavin Newsom, and maybe that starts the domino chain of getting rid of some of these people.
Do you remember the last post-recall governor election in California? That was wild, man. That was wild.
Well, they got rid of Gray Davis, right? It was Schwarzenegger.
Yeah. I just remember all these funny characters running for governor. Emmanuel Davis at Webster, I believe, was running for governor. It was a pretty funny time. And how funny is it now that Florida man used to be this thing we mocked and laughed at. Now he's like the envy. I'm jealous of Florida man.
Florida man's doing it right. He's wrestling alligators and saving dogs. His cigar doesn't even get wet while he's doing it. I mean, he's living the right life. But I can tell you this, when I was in Florida, I was down on the Southwest coast, which is a little quieter. It's not, people think of Florida, everyone seems to think of Miami right now. But I had a couple meetings for locals in Miami because that's where the tech world is moving. They're fleeing the progressive dystopia of San Francisco, which is expensive and drugs everywhere and homelessness and it's just horrible. And you've got a DA who doesn't want to arrest people and you're allowed to steal $900 worth of stuff. So you could walk into Best Buy and steal a PlayStation and 4 games, but if you steal the 5th game, then I guess you're in trouble. I mean, it's just such a crap factory up there.
I am not in favor of the relocation of Silicon Valley to Miami. Miami is one of my favorite places in the whole country, in the whole world. Please don't ruin it, people. Please.
So I talked about this on my show yesterday because everyone that I talked to in Florida, and my last night there, I just sat at a bar, big bar, talked to all sorts of different people. We just decided to go and just chat with people. The Floridians are rightfully worried. They're going, hey, we did it right. You guys mocked us, Florida man, blah, blah, blah. But look, you're all coming here. And this is a great intellectual exercise for not only for the Floridians that are now going to have to welcome people, but for the people leaving. Will you finally accept, you Silicon Valley elitists? Will you finally accept that it was the policies that you voted in that destroyed not only your cities, but your companies and your families because of education and everything else? So don't import that or don't export that to Florida. So the good Floridians, I hope that they will really stand for what they believe in and show people the way. And by the way, I do think that can happen. When I was in Miami and now all the tech bros are down there and I was there raising money for locals and everything, you could really feel like people were, and it's tough because getting out of wokeism and leftism, it ain't easy. And there's a hostage situation, like a self-hostage situation. But there was a real sense of like, oh, we are moving here for a reason and it does have a little something to do with us. So my hope is that sticks, but we shall see.
I should hope so. My background, I studied a lot about Latin America. I've traveled all over Latin America. I speak Spanish. I love going to Miami. It is the capital of Latin America. There's people from all over the world, great music, great food, great parties, great sun. The last thing I want to see there is a bunch of tech bros in Patagonia quilted vests with V-necks on, mixed with like Wall Street guys down there trying to make it their new hotspot. I'm worried about it. Please don't ever go to the Standard Hotel. It's the worst place in the whole world. You will not have any fun there, tech bro. Please do not go there.
I was there for one night and I stayed at the Standard about a month ago when I was there doing some other stuff. But this time I was going to stay at there again. It was sold out. So I stayed at the Carillon or something, the Carillion. But the Standard, it's quite a scene over there. Quite a scene.
It's one of my favorite places in the world. I love it. I love it. So comedy, and you segued into interviewing. Now, how would you even describe what you do? Are you a journalist, an interviewer, a talker guy? Like, how would you describe it? And when did you first realize that this is where you wanted to go with your career?
Yeah, well, I'm not a journalist. I would say at some level, I might be doing something somewhat close to journalism, but that's only because there are virtually no journalists left. There are very few fact-finding out there on the ground, neutral people fighting the power, doing actual journalism. We know we have activists masquerading as journalists. When I started doing the Rubin Report as an interview show, because as you know, I was on the Young Turks before that when I was a Bernie supporting lefty, and I did a show that was a little bit more like The View, kind of hot topics sort of stuff. When I moved, I know the exact date that we filmed it. It was September 9th, 2015. It aired the next day. I had moved to Aura TV, which was Larry King's digital network. And for the first show, I wanted to do something a little bit different. And I interviewed Sam Harris, the well-known atheist and
Muslim
and free. What do you say?
Muslim hater.
Well,
we're joking here. We're joking.
He doesn't believe in God, but he believes Trump is the devil. I'll say that much. But I like Sam. But what? Okay, the Trump stuff is sort of nuts. But in any event, I interviewed Sam because at that time it was a little bit after he had been on Real Time with Bill Maher and that whole moment that woke up so many people, including me, where Ben Affleck, who I'm pretty sure was on steroids because he was about to be Batman, in effect called Sam Harris and Bill Maher gross and racist. And then all hell broke loose. I ended up devoting my book, by the way, to Ben Affleck because of that, because he led to my political awakening. But in any event, there was such an interesting moment there that then I saw all of these people suddenly calling Bill Maher racist. And it was like, what is happening to the left? Are liberals willing to talk about ideas and the difference In this case, Sam was talking about the difference between, you should be able to criticize a religion, which is just a set of ideas, but you don't want to be bigoted towards people, which of course we all know is true. So I did basically an hour and a half interview with him, which was my first sort of long form sit down. And it felt real. It felt important. It felt relevant. And the second the show was done, even though they had signed me, Aura had signed me to do this kind of panel thing, I went back in there and I talked to the execs and I said, that's what I want to do. And that really was when, in many ways, you talk about that alignment, that in many ways when it kind of locked, at least at the career level for me, because I did something important. I did something real. I made a decision to say, oh, there's something there and I'm going to go to it. There's something in the distance and I want to get to that. And then from that, I started interviewing a lot of disgruntled lefties, I would say, the disaffected liberals. Majid Nawaz, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, Douglas Murray, who I would say is, from a British perspective, is a little more conservative, but seeing all of these people who believed in the things that I believe, but saw something very dangerous happening on the left. That's over 5.5 years ago now. And it's like, man, everyone's just repeating the stuff that we were saying back then, which I guess is nice at some level, although often feels frustrating to me.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that about things that we were saying years ago. I grew up online, as it were, in some very niche places online. And some of the things that we were talking about 10 and 15 years ago about the march of radical feminism and all these things, we were branded as crazy conspiracy theorists, tinfoil hat wearing people, just nut jobs. And even I denied what was really going on for a number of years. It really took, me getting canceled and me discovering at work, them writing, too many white people on the board of the HR committee meetings and things like this. And the Kavanaugh hearings was really what just finally just drilled it into my brain that, yes, the language of radical feminism is here. It's affecting us. It's affecting everything. It's even in the highest court in the land. And so it took me some time to really accept it myself. But once I did, obviously, it felt good on one hand. And yes, I do take some pride in being right, for like a decade before we got to this point. But there's no pride or no joy in seeing what has happened here. And one of the ways I've chosen to sort of deal with this is similar to you and truly in part inspired by you, Dave. So thank you, is to engage in these kind of conversations and to talk to people and to get things out there. And I'm learning this process as I go. Did you interview as you went? Did you study this? Do you have inspirations? Like, how did you figure out how to do this? Because you're doing a great job, right?
Well, thanks. I just go into my interviews with an open mind. I have never once in the hundreds or thousands of interviews that I've done, I've never tried to get somebody. Mm-hmm. I've always felt that if you ask the right question, which some people might say is a softball question, if you ask the right question and you let somebody talk long enough, you can figure out if they know really what they're saying or not. You can, if they don't, by the way, you can watch them actually tie the lasso around their neck and hang themselves. You can see it happening often. That doesn't mean that I'm a perfect interviewer by any stretch, but I would say, I mentioned Larry King before, and he just passed, and he became a friend and a mentor, and in some ways like a bonus grandfather for me. And, I remember when I was 12, 13, watching Larry King on CNN, and I always thought, like, here's this nice man having interesting conversations. And it was funny because when the Rubin report really started blowing up around 2015, 2016, and I started getting just like this unending hate from the supposedly tolerant people who are now calling me a Nazi and a bigot and everything else, but they're so tolerant, right? They kept saying, well, you're not asking hard questions. You're not asking the hard questions. Now, I always felt that actually you can ask hard questions and just be kind of nice about it. You really can do that. But what I also felt was, everywhere else, and we still see this now, politics is a freaking blood sport. And let's not forget, CNN replaced Larry King with Piers Morgan, who was an absolute horror as an interviewer because he always made it about him and chose people to fight with. So my feeling was, hey, if you like that, there's plenty of other places to get that. What I felt was, hey, if I can give someone an hour and really figure out what they think, then that's pretty cool. And obviously a lot of people like it. I'll give you one example of where that can become difficult. So I had Marianne Williamson on, remember Miss Crystal, who was also, going to be a presidential candidate or something like that. I had her on, and it was obvious that, like, from the get-go, like, I view the world very differently than her. Like, and this, by the way, this is, like a year ago or so, maybe a little bit more than that. So this is my political beliefs were very on the table at that point, which also can complicate your job as an interviewer, because if no one knows what you think, then you can always seem impartial. But if they know what you think, well, if someone says something against what you think and you don't immediately hit them over the head with it, well, then people will be like, oh, he's a pushover or something like that. And it's like, no, I'm just trying to be respectful. You know what I think already. But that aside, the fundamental difference that I have with someone like Marianne Williamson is that she's a collectivist and I'm an individualist. So she believes in collective white guilt over slavery. And we got into that. And at one point in the interview, she had said so many things that it was so obvious that I disagree with, that I felt, okay, instead of berating her or turning it into a debate show, what should I do here? And people can go back and watch. And about halfway through, I said, hey, I just want to stop for a second. And I just think we have to acknowledge, we just have to acknowledge the fundamental impasse that we have, which is that you believe in collectivism and I believe in individualism. And then, by the way, we continued the interview and it was just fine. And then ironically, when the cameras stopped, she suddenly said to me, oh, I'm kind of a libertarian too, and the left is totally bananas, which was sort of hilarious. Like, you don't say that, like that was the most interesting thing that you said, and you didn't say that on camera. But anyway, that's what can make being an interviewer challenging, but I never really studied it. I think it's a fundamental curiosity about humans. I can tell you're curious about humans. You're on a mission. I remember how long ago was it? We met in a hallway in DC at some event that I was doing. And you came up to me. I was walking down the hall and, you said, I'm Jack, I'm going through this situation right now. You kind of told me. And then it's actually been very cool over 5 years watching you grow and getting involved with Tim Pool and seeing those things. Like, I love seeing people go along the path and keep going. And by the way, everyone's interviewing people right now. And maybe in 3 years, I won't even be doing that anymore. I like doing the direct to camera stuff. And if everyone's going to do long form interviews, I'll find something else to do. But as long as it's valuable and enjoyable for me, I'll continue to do it.
Yes, lots of people are doing interviews, and for me, it's not, my brand isn't long form interviews. My brand is curiosity, which is what you just said. I am just, my whole mission is just curiosity. I just want to learn more. I want to understand more. I want to have conversations across the aisle. I want to just get things out into the open and just learn. In fact, this is basically, I'm living basically my dream life, to be totally honest. Like, I woke up. That's
awesome,
today,
man.
Yeah. I'm preparing to talk to Dave Rubin. We're going live. Thousands and thousands of people are going to see this. And I'm getting paid and living my life to talk to people that I find interesting, to read people's books, have them on the show, and then be able to just interrogate them, in a good way for a couple of hours and really tease out what their work was. And I just released a podcast that I had recorded almost a year ago with Matt Stoller. Matt Stoller is a Democrat, a leftist populist. And we did a great interview, and we held off for a number of reasons releasing it. One of which was just Corona was dominating everything. And our conversation, very evergreen. It's a historic conversation. But, this is the kind of work that I'm after, is like just trying to cross boundaries and find common ground. Because I was thinking, there was enough people for like the party of decriminalization, of legalized gay marriage, of guns. But now if you add to that anti-woke, anti-lockdown, and anti-corporate, like there's gotta be enough of us that meet all of those ticks that I think we could actually be a force, especially when you add in anti-corporate and anti-woke. I mean, we are living in a corporate techno-fascist society, whether or not people have admitted it fully just yet. So anti-woke, anti-corporate, anti-lockdown, pro-decriminalization, pro-civil rights. I mean, that seems like a good group of people. We should be reaching out to folks like that, just like this.
Yeah, Jack, you're pro-freedom. I mean, that's right. It. You're pro-freedom. You want individual rights, meaning everyone that's in the United States legally should be treated exactly equally under the law. And by the way, equality is very different than equity, of course. They want an equitable society, which in effect is a communist or socialist society where we all end up in the same place. Let's not forget, 2 days before the election, Kamala Harris posted that cartoon. I'm sure you saw it, on her Twitter feed where they talked about equity, and it literally at the end said, so we can all end up in the same place. Well, what that doesn't, it's just meaningless. Okay, so I'm vice president, she's vice president, we're all ending up in the same place. Like, it doesn't make any sense. But by the way, to bring this back to Marvel from very early on, Thanos wanted us all to end up in the same place, in effect, right? Thanos saw a world of finite resources. I'm going to have to kill an awful lot of people to get utopia. I don't believe in utopia. I believe the best that you can do is set up a place that's equal for people. And then depending on hard work, depending on luck that maybe you create, or some of it's God-given or whatever else it is, by creating good relationships, by having good ideas, you can flourish in that system. That's what capitalism is. By the way, it doesn't mean it's perfect. It doesn't mean there isn't crony capitalism and corrupt politicians and all those things, but it's the best system out of a bunch of bad systems to manage all sorts of people. That really is all it is. So what you just described there that you want, I think 80% of Americans want, and they don't even realize it. I mean, that's really what my book was about, that we don't have to agree on So for example, Jack, I don't know your position off the top of my head. I don't know your position on abortion. Whatever it might be, and I'm happy to discuss it if you want, I know that we want to live in the same society with each other, right? Like, we want to live in a place that, whether we agree on that or not, or whether we agree that the marginal tax rate should be the same, or whether the estate tax is moral or not, that we want to live in functionally the same society. I think most Americans want that. And in many ways, I would say, if you really want a dividing line of the day, as I said, it's not left, right anymore, you're either woke or you're conservative. Meaning, I don't mean conservative meaning a card-carrying member of the Republican Party and you have a picture of Mitch McConnell in the kitchen. What I mean is, you're woke. You've either accepted the ideas of collectivism, you've accepted the ideas of state authoritarian power, and that we are all fundamentally racist, and it is our job to rejigger a society in a way that's going to fix that. Or you believe that freedom is kind of messy, but it's the best thing we got, and let's run with that. And I would say that makes you a modern conservative. So I don't have a problem if someone says even though I wrote a book defending liberalism, it's over my shoulder, I don't have a problem if someone says I'm a conservative through that lens.
Don't burn this book by Dave Rubin. Go out and get it right now. I think what you just said right there, it just reinforces me why the Jordan Peterson moment was such a big deal. The first interview on Rogan. The first interview on Rogan was such a big deal because he was, I think, one of the first people to crystallize or very clearly state everything that we're saying, but then tie it into science and tie it into psychology and tie it into history, and the passion that he delivered his message with, and the honesty and authenticity that came out of him. That was a really powerful moment for all of us on this dissident red pill, weird nether state, that we weren't card carrying GOP members. We weren't going to just vote red no matter what. And we did vote for Bill Clinton and Obama, unfortunately. And so it was a catalyzing event. And it was an eye-opening event. And it also not only changed a lot of our lives, it changed your life. That Jordan Peterson Rogan interview directly led to your conversations. And I don't want to talk about Jordan himself, but like, what was that experience like, just being out there and just seeing the response and city after city and theater after theater? What did that tell you about the world? What did you learn from that experience?
I really, everything that I say here, I mean, but when I tell you that, when I look at that part of my life, that year and a half that we did that, it almost feels like a dream. Like, when I think back to it, I'm like, did that really happen? Did we do 120 cities in 20 countries? Theaters that were basically on the smallest one was maybe 2,000. The biggest ones were probably about 8,000. Like, and every single one was sold out. Did that really occur? Like, and yeah, it did. And it was amazing. And the things that I saw this guy do by just saying what he believed is true. And by the way, that doesn't make him perfect. It doesn't make him Jesus. It doesn't make him infallible. So I've seen a lot of people be very critical of him because of the health stuff that he's dealt with over the last, year and a half or so. And it's like, he never purported to be perfect. He actually talked about dealing with some level of depression. He talked about taking a small amount of Klonopin. And I was with him, I believe we were in Iowa when he got the call that his wife had terminal cancer. We were out to lunch. I was with him. And then try to imagine, so you get that call. You're out on the road in the middle of America in the midst of like this crazy fame, But what also came with the crazy fame? An unbelievable amount of hatred. All of the hit pieces, the awful piece front page of the New York Times, Enforced Monogamy, that almost derailed the entire tour. And just the litany of stuff that was amazing and horrible, you know, the sold out shows and meet and greets and all of that stuff. And then also the protesters and the threats and everything else. But I'll tell you one story that I didn't write about in the book. I've only mentioned this once or twice before, that I think really sums up what was so magical about the entire thing and how it truly changed me as a person. We were in Dublin in Ireland and we finished up the show. And you know, when you're one of the performers at a show, you don't walk out of the main exit because there's usually a lot of people there. They got a little exit on the side. You usually walk out into a side alley. So Jordan, myself, his wife, and the tour manager, we walk out the side. This is probably 1 a.m. Again, this is after a day of, I think we flew into Ireland that morning, a day of travel, a day of media appearances, the meet and greets, like the hour and a half lecture that he gave that was different every night. All of that stuff. It's a long day. Like he's beat at the end. I'm beat at the end. We walk out and we're in this dark alley and we see these two guys about 40 feet away from us. And they're embracing and they both appear to be sobbing and they see us, they kind of run right at us. The tour manager kind of freaked out for a second because, you know, are they approaching us in a negative way or something? And they both have, now they're really, we got close, we could see they were really crying. It turned out that it was a father and son. The father was about 65, the son was about 25, something like that had lost touch 5 years ago. They had a falling out, completely lost touch. They both bought the book, 12 Rules for Life, and independently of each other went alone to the show and saw each other at the show, and they reconnected that night. And as I'm telling you this, I'm getting chills up my spine. Truly, I'm getting chills up my spine as I'm telling you this. They told us that. They're both crying. Jordan began to cry. The tour manager did. I teared up. He hugged them both, said a few words. I don't even remember exactly what he said, but I thought, man, this is real. This is real. This isn't, I'm out there hawking a book or I'm trying to sell t-shirts or hats. He didn't even want to sell merch. You know, the tour people always want you to sell merch. He didn't even want to sell the book at the event. And they're like, no, it's a book tour. You got to sell the book. But I saw something real. And by seeing that, it helped me. The book is about going from chaos to order. It helped me put a little order in my life.
Indeed. And he had a huge impact on a lot of people, faults and all. We all have them. And, but yet his impact on me and on America and on you and on those two gentlemen in the alley, truly profound. The relationships that we've made along the way, Dave, this is what it's all about, right? But I'm going to ask you now about some other relationships too. You know, the intellectual dark web. It has gotten a lot of attention. It's been chided. It's been supported. It's been found to be very intriguing. Who even knows what it is? I think a lot of it happened to begin right there where you're sitting, perhaps in your studio. What would you say is the current state of the intellectual dark web? You know, tell me what's going on with those people, the nexus, the energy there. You know, what's happening with the IDW, Dave?
Yeah, well, you know, it's kind of funny because although I'm in a different house right now, but my other house where most of it happened, that was my garage. My studio was my garage, and the fact that, you know, in my garage, like all of these great people, Shapiro and Peterson and Sam Harris, and like this whole crew of people who were just fighting the monster that we all see right now. We were just early. It basically was a bunch of early people on the thing that we all now realize is the thing that we got to fight. And that happened in my house, and that Tucker Carlson walked into my house. I would say, you know, there was no real full definition of what the IDW was. But if you're just talking about people who are trying to talk about difficult things in that regard, I would consider him part of it. Tucker Carlson walked into my house. He opens the door to my garage and he goes, "Holy fucking shit, you did it right, man." Now, this is a guy who has the #1 rated show in the history of cable news. I think he probably makes like 12 million bucks a year, you know, something completely insane. Yet he walked into my house, looked at my garage and thought, man, this guy's doing it right. And I thought, it doesn't get any better than that. I mean, in the inscription that he wrote in my book, he said something to that effect. He's like, you're doing it for all the suckers that still work in offices. Now, these days no one works in an office anymore. But in effect, what the IDW was this like loosely affiliated group of people that were academics or scientists or talkers, or Rogan, comedians, that were just trying to piece some of the stuff together. And then it really blew up, obviously, after that Barry Weiss article in the New York Times. And I think what it sort of was at first was, in many ways, it was sort of an escape from leftism. Like, we were painting an escape from leftism for the good remaining liberals, for anyone that still felt that liberalism should be about open inquiry and individual rights and free speech and rule of law and those things. And then I think what has happened now is that, and this sort of gets to what I was saying a few minutes ago, if you're one of those people now, in effect, you are a modern conservative. You are what I would say is a future conservative. And the split now that I think has occurred in the IDW is that there's still some liberals that think, oh, if they're just nice enough with wokeism, that it won't destroy them. It won't completely annihilate the New York Times, or it won't decimate Harvard, or if they're just nice and if they really make it so that Trump is the bad guy, right? As long as they really focus on Trump being the bad guy, the monster won't eat them. Now, obviously, that's not what I believe. I don't think that's what Ben Shapiro believes. Peterson's been a little MIA on the political side of it, but I would suspect that's not what he believes. But I think the more lefty people in that crew, I think they think, oh, well, Trump was the real danger, even though the thing that's coming to burn down our house and take our jobs and destroy the country, at least it's not orange. And I think that has sort of burst forth as the, let's say, the rift, or whatever you might want to call it.
How would you describe a rift? To be honest, I hadn't kept up with some of those names so much because I got a sense of what you were talking about here, that truly in their minds, it was all just a Trump phenomenon or a reaction to Trump or something that wasn't just 50 years in the making, by the way. Has taken decades to work through our institutions and has been a slow moving car wreck that we've all been observing for years, as if those trends weren't in place and was all Trump. So when you say rift, how would you describe a rift, this rift?
Yeah, well, for a while, we were all going on each other's shows. We were all talking about this stuff honestly. We were agreeing to disagree on a bunch of stuff. The example I always use on this is that if you take a guy like Ben Shapiro, a guy like Sam Harris, they disagree on literally everything. Everything, every public policy, every existential issue, every religious issue, belief issue. I mean, they disagree on everything, but they were agreeing to, hey, we can sit down and talk about it, right? Well, we basically kind of don't do that anymore. And I think the ones of us, I would say in this case, and I'm trying to be careful not to throw anyone specifically under the bus here. So I'll answer it this way. I would say those of us that are the more right-leaning people of it at this point, who I think, it's not even right-leaning. I would say we see the world as it is, not as how we wish it to be. Yeah. We're sort of on the outs with the other crew. I don't really care anymore because my feeling is, hey, and Jack, I know you know this. Once you say, this is who I am, this is what I believe, you will start building bridges in crazy ways. The amount of people that now I hold as close friends and confidants that years ago I maybe thought were the bad guys or wrong, and I'm talking about Glenn Beck, and I'm talking about Prager, and I'm talking about Shapiro and Larry Elder, and all sorts of people. Man, not only have I become good friends with them, but I've seen that they have been talking about this even before I was talking about it. And that's pretty damn cool when you go, holy cow, people came before me and now I play some role in this. So for me, it's like if what the remaining last few liberals, the Jedi after Order 66, if they want to just be spread across the galaxy in their own little things to make sure that they're not assassinated next, they can go ahead and do it. But what I would much rather do is build new institutions, whether that's educational or cultural, or build new businesses, build new tech companies, as I'm doing right now. And I see the room to do that is again, it's on the right. Even though I know, guess what? Glenn Beck and I disagree about some stuff, but he wants to live in the same country as me. He sees the same enemy. I don't like using that word in a political context, but right now that's where we're at. The enemy of all of us is the machine right now. It's the ever-expanding machine. So I want allies, and I'm going to go where the allies are, even if that's not what I thought 2 years ago.
The guy that I always wanted to talk to, besides you, the most out of that whole crew was Eric Weinstein, and I felt like he was just so close that if Jack Murphy could just get Eric alone for a few minutes, I could set him straight. That's the way I've always felt. I've always wanted to talk to him, and I still would love to talk to him. I just unfortunately didn't see an appreciation for the threat. And well, I think that's part of the dividing line. Yeah.
Well, it is in that. So, obviously Eric and I did tons of shows together, all of that stuff. But, when I've interacted with him in the last year or so, let's say on Twitter, like, just a few days ago, he sent out a tweet he tags at Jack Dorsey on Twitter. And, oh, I wish you would respect free speech more. This isn't who you are, blah, blah, blah. Now, I'm not saying this to throw Eric under the bus. But what I would say is that sort of, no matter how real the threat is, this idea that we can negotiate with things, that we can logically argue with things, that will fix things. I, in many ways, think that is the flaw of liberalism. I sent a long Twitter thread about this about 2 weeks ago, that liberals tend to think that everything can be decided by logic and reason alone. This, by the way, was very much a point that Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris had those live debates about, where they were basically, Sam was taking the position that the human mind and logic and reason are sort of enough to organize society. And Jordan's argument was there is something beneath that. In this case, his belief was that these were religious stories, that there are eternal truths. I have come to believe that, man. I wrote about it in the book. I think that liberalism in and of itself is not enough. Just logic and reason is not the driver of societies. Yes, it might be the driver of you as the individual, but it is not the ultimate organizing factor. It is a factor, not the factor. So I would say when you constantly, no matter how much the enemy is attacking, if your argument is, but if we just reason with them, and I think a lot of liberals really struggle with this, right? They come from Harvard. They come from these places of higher education that in many ways are no longer anything close to that. When they're confronted with it, it's such an affront to their worldview that logic and reason and science and math are all the things that you need. And I think there's something else that you need. I think that there is a bedrock of truth beneath us. I think our founders understood that, which is why we have God-given rights. They didn't give us the rights. The government did not make me free. God made me free. And we can have all sorts of debates about what that means, what the definition of God is and all of that. And believe me, I saw Jordan get asked this question a million times. But I think that has led liberalism into the sort of dead end that it feels that it's in right now. And it's why they have no moves against the woke. And the people that will build the new institutions, believe it or not, they're going to be the conservatives. But what's going to happen is you're going to get a really wide swath of conservatives. So I think you'll get conservatives probably a little bit like we are that are maybe on the more libertarian side of it. You're going to get some traditionally religious conservatives. You're going to get the guys that are there in between. But that thing will be able to build things. And my hope is that we can still convince the last remaining good liberals that that's the move, not negotiating with the guy that is telling you he's here to kill you.
This is something that's very hard for people to accept, that logic and reason don't work. They want people to say, well, we should just do more investigative journalism. Kudos to James O'Keefe and Project Veritas. But still, the completely different tacks have to be taken. And logic and reason, unfortunately, are not going to be the tools that we're going to use to get there. Now, Dave, I understand we're up against a little bit of a time crunch here. So I want to ask one more thing. In your story, you've always talked about being a hustler. When you were early on in your comedy career, you started clubs, you're out there handing out flyers. You started your own show, you shopped it around, you moved to different places, and you took some initiative there. And now you're working on Locals. Tell me about Locals. What has it been like being the founder of a new tech startup, and how's that going? And what phase are you in? And what do you see for the future there?
Oh, man. Well, I'm glad you're asking, because in many ways, this is now what I'm starting to care about more, not more than the things that we've talked about here, but like, this is what I think in many ways, like the thing that I will be known for will be, because I think, as I just said, we have to build new institutions. And I didn't just sit here for the last couple of years and talk about it. I started doing it. So you may remember a little over 2 years ago, I think it was December of 2019, might have been 2018, when Carl Benjamin, Sargon of Akkad on YouTube, he got booted off Patreon because he said the N-word. But he did not say the N-word. Well, first off, he didn't say it on his channel. He didn't say it on his Patreon. He said it on someone else's channel, not to be racially pejorative. He said it to mock the people who use those words. That was the point. What happened was Patreon basically said, no strikes, you're just done. They just closed his account. This is where he made most of his money and made his living. Well, Jordan and I were on tour at the time. We saw that and we thought, okay, this is a bridge too far. We've all been talking about what's happening with big tech, but we got to make a move. Now, my company was making about 80% of our rev on Patreon. I was making about 30 grand a month on there. But I felt we had to do something. Jordan was making a nice amount of money on there. I have employees. It's not just me that I'm paying for when I do this. But I thought we've got to do something. And that in essence, so we both left Patreon. Sam Harris then left Patreon. A few other people left. We felt that we were making a stand for free speech. And I thought, well, all right, if I'm going to continue and I'm going to be independent and my show's going to be in my garage and all this stuff, well, I got to figure out a way to really be independent. It can't just be that I don't have a boss telling me what to talk about. I got to figure out a way to be less dependent on the pipes, on the wires, on all of this stuff. And that's how Locals was born. And now this is a little over 2 years ago. I said to my brother-in-law, who's an Israeli startup guy, as they all are, I said, hey, I need you to build me a subscription model and I need it tomorrow, man. And we built it real quick. Suddenly, by leaving Patreon, by announcing, hey, I'm going to do what I think is right and figure out a new path, my rev jumped by 30% because people want people to be brave. They want people to do the right thing. Yes. Well, then once we started that on the subscription side, we said, okay, well, what else do people need to be free? They need video that they own as opposed to just putting everything on YouTube. They need audio that they own. Well, what else would they want? They would want live chat, which we have now. They would want a slick app with push notifications. They would want to own the data. They would want to own the email addresses that if they walk from the product, they can have all of this stuff. I have 1.7 million YouTube subscribers, something like that. I have no access to these people. It's completely up to the algorithm, whether they see my videos or not. So I would say in the last 2 years with Locals, we've built a really slick product to keep creators independent. We build digital homes. We give you the tools. We give you the key. What you do in your house is up to you. We have a terms of service, meaning you can't threaten violence and coordinate terrorist attacks or post porn. But beyond that, it's up to you what goes on in your community. And by the way, it's just like my house, right? Like you can say what you want about me outside my house, but I don't invite everybody into my house to say whatever they want about me. So I think we've solved probably 95% of the problems for 95% of the people. We're working on seriously cutting edge tech. You know, there's all the stuff. We could go into a whole conversation about Parler and what happened with Amazon servers and all that. We have all sorts of backup servers. I can't even reveal everything that we have, but we're working on decentralized storage. I mean, there's so much stuff here related to crypto on the payment side and decentralized storage and everything else. But to really answer your question, there's a ton going on right now. I was in Miami, like the tech world has finally come around because I was going into all of those offices in San Francisco 2 years ago and just getting, blah, blah, blah. And suddenly everybody wants to talk to us. And we're going to make some announcements in the next 2 to 3 weeks about some of the people that are coming on board in terms of the funding and everything else, like serious game-changing people. And what I'm most proud of is that this is what I said before, but I didn't just sit there and complain. Everybody just complains all freaking day long. But I actually did something. And let's give a minor shout out here to Karlin Borsenko, who you know, of course, as well, who has a very similar story to us. Well, what did she see in the last couple of days? She saw that crazy diversity thing happening with Coca-Cola and LinkedIn, and she started hitting it and making sure that everybody saw it. And then finally, what happened? The story makes it all the way up to Tucker. And congratulations, Robin DiAngelo, who's a white racist person. They've taken her off LinkedIn. Now, that's not cancel culture, okay? Let's just be clear on that. That's someone fighting for actual equality and to get racism out of things. So I like people who build, man. Again, that's why it's so cool that, I saw you in that hallway, whatever that was 5 years ago, and it's like, you're doing good stuff now. When I've seen Tim Pool on the way up, when I've seen Andy No on the way up, all these people that I was like, wow, you were doing something and you kept the freaking grind going. That's what it's all about.
Amen to that. People respect demonstrated acts of courage. It is the one of the easiest forms of leadership. You go out, you take a risk, you see a problem, you build, you create, you run through a brick wall, you turn around, you say, "Come on, let's go." People will be there. They will fall in behind you through demonstrated acts of courage. So kudos to you for picking up the ball and running with it and just creating and building. It's something that I'm all about. Build and create, very masculine energy, something that we talk about in the liminal order and that we foster in all of our members, to build and to create. And it's no wonder Carolyn, she and I actually crossed paths years ago, in the same place where I got canceled from. So it's funny that we have that history. Christopher Rufo, Corey DeAngelis,
Oh, yeah.
a number of these guys, and girls, doing stuff, action, taking action. People respect action. They want to support it. They want to get behind it. And Dave, congratulations on the success of Locals. I've been taking a very good, hard look at it, talking to your staff who are first-rate salespeople and managers. Congratulations on those hires there. And I'm excited to hear about all the things that you've got coming down the line here. So thank you for that. Thanks for the opportunity there on Locals. Thanks for coming on the show and talking to me. It has been some time coming. We did dance around there for a little bit, and then the Jordan Peterson thing happened, and here we are. And I really appreciate it. It's been great to talk to you, and thanks for coming on the show. I hope you do it again.
Listen, I appreciate the accolades, and it goes both ways here. Like you're doing something real and good. There's value in that. You know you're doing something good, and you just keep going. That's it. People want to know, how do you do it? How do you do it? How do you get a YouTube show, man? How do you get it? Do it. Get out there and do it. And guess what? If you hate Dave Rubin, if you think Jack Murphy doesn't know what he's doing and you're watching this, do a better job than us. We'll find something else to do. But in the meantime, I have nothing better to do than save the world. So let's keep going, man.
Consistency and persistency, guys. I think that is the most common factor in every success story, consistency and persistency. So keep that in mind. Dave, thank you, guys. Thank you very much. Guys, go out and get the book. Don't burn this. Check out the Rubin Report on YouTube. Go follow and join the Locals community of your favorite content creator who's on Locals. And if you are a creator, go down there and check it out. That's locals.com. Dave, thanks so much. I appreciate it. I'll talk to you soon. I'm Jack Murphy. Follow me on Twitter and on YouTube. Hit subscribe, all those fine things. And if you're into masculinity, sovereignty, and brotherhood, come check out the Liminal Order. I'll see you there, guys. Thanks very much, Dave. Have a great day, buddy.
Thanks, brother. Be good.
All right.